Good evening, everyone. We are now in Second Kings chapter 13. Again, we are told of the reign and the descent of kings, and is always contrasted between the northern and southern kingdoms. So, if we were to plot this out, we have the northern kingdom, and then we have the southern kingdom. One of the challenges that occasionally we do have is to be able to put the dates a little clearer. And so we find that we have Yehu uh, was the king in the north for a while, and he reigned for 28 years. And this would be in chapter 10 and in verse 36. And in the seventh year of his reign, then we find that the southern king came up, and that would be Joash. And Joash ruled for uh, 40 years. And so we have now Yehu actually ruled for 28 years, right? 28 years. Then we are told in verse 1, and right here we can read verse 1. In the 23rd year of Joash, son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, then we have a new king on board, Jehoahaz. Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel at Samaria, and he reigned for 17 years. Now, if you look at this particular chart, then you would find this is in chapter 12, verse 2, and Joash reigned for 40 years. And in his 21st year, we would see that if you minus 7 years, there will be only 21 years left. So now we just need to draw a line. This is 21 years. And yet in chapter 13, verse 1, we are told it is 23 years, right? And so we can actually safely say that every time there is a period of time, for example, for Joash, there is 21 years plus a remnant of the year ahead and the remnant of the year after. And that would be how we could see 23, right? 23. But it is really 21 full years plus 2 part years. That would be how we would see this. Then after this, we could say that this would be Yehoahaz. Yehoahaz then reigned. Yehoahaz. Now, that would be how we would see, and he would reign for 17 years. So in 13, 17 years. Now, with these 17 years, you can almost see that it would be towards the end of the reign of Joash, because Joash reigns for 40 years. You add another 17 to the 23, you will find at this time there will be the same number of years. So we go on with Jehoahaz. In verse 2, there is the and then in the front, which we don't read, after we are told that he reigned. The way that he reigned was that he did evil in the eyes. Remember, good and evil is always in the eyes of God. And then followed the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nevat, into which he misled Israel. He did not turn from them. Now, this word he misled Israel is the word khata, which is generally translated as sin, but this is correct. Misled, did a mistake. So the translation is good. The Hebrew language don't like the English concept of sin, but they are more precise. There is the khata, there's the avon, and there is the pesha. And when the general word of khata is used and generally translated as sin, sin offering, and here it's the same word, it is better to understand this as a mistake, to be misled, didn't actually follow everything that God said. And he did not turn away from them. Now, what was this? This is the golden calves. And Jeroboam had two golden calves, one in Bethel and one in Dan. The intent was to allow the northern kingdom people not to go down to Jerusalem for fear that they won't come back. Verse 3. And then the nose of God was hot against Israel. Reason being is another chance was given. Now, the one before, which is Yehu had done well. Yehu had destroyed all the places of Baal, but he left the sins of Jeroboam. Now, with the son, Jehoahaz, he continued that cultural tradition that seemed to be okay, all the kings were doing since day one, and God was not happy and God was angry. And if we recall in chapter 12, because Jehu did not deal with the sins of Jeroboam, the eastern side of Israel, that is on the eastern shore of the Jordan, was slowly taken up by Hazael. And so God is using Hazael to teach Israel and Judah a lesson. Notice God had promised that when he would chastise them by the hand of their enemies. So, and then he gave. Now, this word gave uh, is a continual practical practice, I guess you can say that. Continually gave them over to Hazael, the king of Aram, uh, and to Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael. Now, this one is what we call a background. In this background, God used Aram to constantly teach Israel a lesson. And so this idea continually handed, gave them over, allow Aram to oppress them, to cause trouble to them. And one interesting fact is it's not just one king, two generations of the king of Aram, Hazael and his son Ben-Hadad. Verse 4. And then Jehoahaz. This idea is when you use the word appease the Lord, you can actually think of it as to appeal to God, right? Appeal to God. Appeal, pleaded. And this is what it means. It means that he actually realized that he is small. That is this word appease, appeal, plead to God. And better, we have also lost some of the words here. Pleaded to the face or the faces of God. And this gives us an imagery that he really was trying to ask God to help relieve him of the problems of Aram. And then God heard him, heard what he said. For he saw the oppression of Israel, how the king of Aram oppressed them. While God allowed the king of Aram to oppress Israel, God does not set boundaries to it in this case and allow the king of Aram to continually disturb and give trouble to the northern kingdom. And Jehoiakim just can't take it anymore. So, and then God gave Israel a savior. Now, this word savior, you can say that this would be a Moshiach, right? A Moshiach. Messiah. I guess you can call that a savior, a deliverer, somebody to deliver Israel. But this deliverer is from the nation of Israel. Now, this deliverer, we can say now, would be his son. This in verse 5, this savior is actually uh, the son of Jehoiachat. Now, interestingly, the son of Jehoiachat, which is called Savior, his name was Joash. And herein lies the confusion. We find that Joash of the north has the same name as Joash in the south. And so all the time when you've got repeated names, we must make sure that we are reading it within the context of those names so that they escape from the hand of the Arameans, and the sons of Israel lived in their tents as previously. Previously means before the oppression of the Arameans, the Syrians. Verse 6. Not only they did not abandon the sins of the house of Jeroboam, which is the actually two golden calves, into which he misled, caused Israel to sin. They walked in them, and the Asherah also remained standing in Samaria. Now, the Asherah in verse 6, it is called the Asherah or the Asherah stump or tree. Right? This is the tree or the stump. This is an idol, and it is in Samaria. And so God says that they are not only there and nobody did anything, instead of being ignored, they actually walked in it, which is according to the priests that were assigned to the two golden calves, as well as the priests that were assigned to the Asherah, which were the remnants from Jezebel. Verse 7. In verse 7, you find that the armies of Aram was so powerful that at the end of the day, they they were overpowering Jehoiakim for now. And then he left Jehoiakim no more than an army of 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 men, right? 10,000 men, because the king of Aram had eliminated them and made them like dust at the threshing. This is how strong the king of Aram is. Verse 8. And for the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did in his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? I just want to make a comment here. The book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, as I mentioned before, we do not have this book. It is one of the lost books that has been mentioned throughout the Kings and Samuel as well. And we don't have this, so we don't know all the details with regards to Jehoiakim. But we do see in Second Chronicles, chapter 23, 24, that covers the next few chapters. Verse 9, and then Jehoiakim lay down with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. So, first of all, when he says, and he lied down, means he died, breathed his last, and is always lying down. And in this case, possibly peacefully with his fathers. So, it would be spoken in the sense where he would be in the same state as the fathers, the previous kings who had died, and he was buried with the fathers in Samaria. The bones were all kept together there. And then his son, here it says, his son Joash became king in his place. So we do find that there is a continuity of the story of Jehoash and then into the son Joash. So let me just extend the diagram here. And after 17 years, Jehoash died. Joash took over and he reigns for 16 years. And we are dealing with Joash here. Joash of the south basically will also come to the end in the next year, which is a full year here. And in our next chapter, we see his son take over. So it is almost at the same time. And that would be what we are reading now. In verse 10, in the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, Jehoash, the king of Jehoiakim, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned for 16 years. And so we do see that this would be the 37th year. And this would be another one more year before there will be a change of guard. The reason being is the way that the numbers are counted, you find that they are generally either all full years, right? All full years, or part year ascension and part year upon death. And thereby you have the full years plus 2 years. I guess you can think of it that this is very similar to the way, sometimes the Chinese would add years to the actual age of a person. But the Hebrew counting of years actually counts this way, either in full years or with additional 1 or 2 years, given the fact that it was a part year in front and part year at the back. Verse 11, we continue to look at Joash, and we are looking at this Joash, not the one in the south, but the one in the north. We have here as it begins, and then he did evil in the sight of the Lord, in the eyes of the Lord. And what did he do? The same thing as the rest of the kings of Israel. He did not turn away from all the sins of Jeroboam, a son of Nevat, into which he misled Israel. Now, what we don't see is he caused them to sin and the sins. These are the same words. Rather, he walked in them, meaning he is actively practicing. Not only that he did not do anything, he would have had a choice of not having any part of it, but just leaving it be, or he could have destroyed it, which he didn't. But in this case, not that he did not destroy it or he did not ignore it, he actually actively participated, very similar to Jehoiachin. And God would have been angry with him as well. So, verse 12, and the remainder of the acts of Joash and all that he did and his might which he fought against Amaziah, the king of Judah, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? So the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel is a book that is lost. Now we read in verse 13, and then there is this word, and then Joash lay down with his fathers, just like Jehoiachin, and Jeroboam sat on his throne, and Joash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. So what we find here would be this. After 16 years, he died, Joash died, and then we have Jeroboam. Oftentimes you see in many charts, you call him Jeroboam the second because this is the second time a king of Israel is named Jeroboam. So you get Jeroboam and Jeroboam the second, but that is our modern day assignment. In the Bible, as you can see, they would freely use and reuse names, but for our purposes, please bear in mind that it is another Jeroboam. Verse 14. Verse 14 essentially is a narrative that happened in the time of Joash. The reason why it happened in the time of Joash is to highlight to us how Joash became the savior as was pleaded by Jehoiachin to God. And that would be the narrative to show that Joash is the deliverer. How Joash managed to overpower the kings of Aram, Hazael, and then later his son Ben Hadad. But it was also a time that Elisha was about to die. And so we read of this when Elisha became sick with illness of which he was to die. That's how we know that he was sick, he was ill, and he was about to die. And the text tells us that Joash, the king of Israel, came to him, and then he cried over him and then said, my father, the chariots of Israel and his horsemen, they are dwindling and they are about to be no more. Now, while he is sick, Joash still remembers Elisha. Now, let me just make a comment about Elisha. Elisha was sick, and the idea was sick is that he was in pain or he was also very weak due to some illness which they can't treat him, and this illness is terminal. As much as Elisha was able to raise the son of the Shunammite, well, earlier on, and we will read a little bit about how his body could also cause such a miracle. He was not able to deal with himself because in the lives of the Hebrew people, healing was a very natural way that the people have a book of healing, that they understand how to use the flora, the fauna, the roots, and they grind it down, dry it up, grind it down into some powder to apply, to drink, and whatever they may do, a natural form of healing. Now, that is what technically in Hebrew healing means. that you would need to do work to grind it down to some form of medicine to apply and to take. It always leads us to understand that if a person is said to be about to die, like Job, right? He would have tried all the possibilities, but it didn't work. Like Hezekiah, the king, later on we will see, he was about to die. It is when they exhaust the knowledge of healing and natural cure that they would resign to the fact that their lives will come to an end in a fairly short time. And Elisha is described that way. Although we read of all the miracles that he would have done, you don't see him doing any miracles upon himself because that's not what the miracles are for. And it was very specific at specific instances. And giving life is not one of them, except for that one time that he revived the son of the Shunammite. And here, Joash came to see him, and Elisha has something to say. And Elisha said to him, take a bow and some arrows. And so Joash took a bow and arrows. And then Elisha said to the king, lay your hand on the bow that's about to shoot. And he laid his hand on it. And then Elisha put his hands on the king's hands to give him the direction, and this would be what we would say, to direct him. And the direction that we can say is towards Aram. Notice all of these are very symbolic. And Elisha said, open the window toward the east, and east would be Aram. That's how his hand is directed to Aram. And he opened it, and Elisha said, shoot. And so he shot. Now, all of this is really a picture lesson. It's not that by shooting this that he could win over Aram, but Elisha is trying to communicate to him in a picture illustration what God has in mind. And he said, the Lord's arrow of victory and the arrow of victory over Aram. That is what you have done. This shot is symbolic of victory, and the victory is over Aram. And then he is told, for you will defeat the Arameans at Aphek until you have put them to an end. Now, Aphek is a place towards the east of Samaria. And this would be east of Samaria. And that's Aphek. And that would be across the river on the eastern shore. And that is also an area where it is the land that belongs to the Arams or the Syrians. And symbolically, what Elisha had done was to demonstrate that they would Joash would survive and would win. And so he said, then take the arrows. And then he took them, and he said to the king of Israel, strike the ground. Now, this idea of strike the ground in verse 18, it is not to take the arrows to strike the ground in terms of holding it and punching it to the ground. But you need to know that this word strike is very much to shoot the arrow as well. Shoot the ground, not shoot out to the east. That is done. That as they look east, that would be the land of Aram. At Aphek, he will succeed and win. But he struck the ground 3 times and stopped. Now, this word struck is very much to shoot. He shot 3 times and stopped. Herein lies the object lesson. The object lesson is this: why did he stop? And that would be what Elisha is asking. Then the man of God became angry at him and then said, "You should have struck 5 or 6 times, then you would have struck Aram until you put an end to it. But now you shall strike Aram only 3 times." What does this mean? Why did he stop? He stopped because he thought that it was enough and he didn't know when to stop. And so he chose to stop before he was told to stop, before he exhausted all his arrows. And so that means that Joash was indicative of holding back in the strike against Aram. Verse 20. And then Elisha died. Now, Elisha would have died somewhere, I suppose, somewhere here, right? We don't exactly know when, but is my best guess that is towards the end of the reign of Joash, because this is, and then after that episode of telling Joash, yes, you will win over the king of Aram, but you will not crush them because you stopped. And it says here, and then they buried him. Now the marauding bands, these are all the little groups of people that will come in to raid. So I guess you can call them raiders. Uh, I would call them raiders, right? The marauding bands would be raiders. People who would come in small groups and come and rob you. Of Moabites would invade the land in the spring of that year. In verse 21, this episode was described while we were talking about these raiders. When they were burying a man, behold, they saw a band of raiders, the Moabite raiders. Understand this: burying a man in Hebrew traditions is really the same day, which means that there is no decay of the person just yet. And then to hide from the raiders, they threw the man into the grave of Elisha. When the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and then stood up on his feet. So now we would want to explain this a little bit more. First of all, he was the idea of the grave of Elisha. This is a burying place. This is a burying place. Understand that this is not a hole in the ground, right? This is a burying place. It's likely to be a hole in the wall of a hill. That would be the traditional grave. And when they were in such a hurry as he tried to hide the man touched the bones of Elisha, which means that Elisha would have died over a year. So this should be after 1 year. The tradition would be after 1 year, they would collect the bones and put it aside. And so the man that just died was thrown into the burying chamber of Elisha, somehow touched. Now, this word touch is not like touch as in lightly touch. I think we can think of it this way. You find the body of the man, and he struck the bones of Elisha. And so the bones of Elisha will be below him. And so as they were throwing him into the burying chamber, the body of this man fell on top of Elisha's bones. I think that would be the way to describe this. So this is not really touch, it should be struck. So it is much harder than just lightly touching. Now, this word here is revived. And I want to draw your attention to this word revive. This word revive literally means uh, be alive. Now, how was he able to be alive again? It would be a miracle, because it was not like the Shunammite woman that Elisha was lying over him, trying to breathe into him, giving him mouth to mouth resuscitation. In this case, Elisha was already dead and only bones left. But there is this miracle that was done when the body of this recently deceased, not decayed, recently deceased, and suddenly he caught wind and he was revived again. Now, I don't know how to explain it. I call it a miracle, but it was a miracle in the sense that we never find a person revive again in the Hebrew Bible after he had been buried for many days. That is not the kind of miracle that the Hebrew Bible talks about. So it's really very much the same day, and he became alive again. Now, the Hebrew text does not describe the mechanism because you can't see the mechanism, but you can see the consequences. And so a dead person would be a person who doesn't move. When he touched the bones of Elisha, he moved again, and that would be how he stood on his feet. He was seen to be alive again. That is how it is being described, right? That's how it's being described. We come to the last part of chapter 13. In verse 22, it says, "And then Hazael, the king of Aram, had oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoiakim," which means this: from here all the way, the whole 17 years, which we can say, right? All the 17 years of his reign, he had oppressed Israel. Next, we read verse 23. "And then the Lord was gracious to them." The idea of gracious here is a favor, had favor, extended favor. Extended favor to them, and had compassion, right? And then had compassion on them, and then turned to them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Uh, he was not willing to eliminate them or cast them away from his presence until now. So what does this mean? It means that God was gracious with them, gracious in the sense of extending favor so they will not be exterminated. God is not willing to eliminate them. The idea of eliminate them was to cause them to be destroyed, right? Cause to destroy. Also, God did not want to throw them away from his face. This is present his face. They were doing evil in the eyes of God. God is still tolerating. So this favor is God's patience. And God's patience means not doing harm to them in the way where he allowed the Assyrians to come to take them over. So God did not allow the Arameans, the Syrians, to do so. Verse 24. And then Hazael, king of Aram, died. And then we have this word after he died, and then his son Ben Hadad became king in his place. And then Jehoash, the son of Jehoiakim, again took from the hand of Ben Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities which he had taken in the war from the hand of his father. And here it says, uh, 3 times Joash defeated him. Why 3 times? Because Joash shot only 3 arrows to the ground at the time of Elisha, and then recovered the cities of Israel. 3 times he would be successful. 3 times he would be victorious. He would win and take back a number of the cities, but he was not able to completely remove the oppression of the king of Aram. Now, in chapter 13, we now read of the death of Elisha, how Joash became the savior of Israel, that after the illustration given to Joash, Joash became the savior, that the king of Aram was not able to win over him, but instead he would defeat the king of Aram, but not totally. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.